Okay, I guess we should begin with an official welcome to the candidate slate. We've got Rachel, Bill, Dave, and Keisha on via Skype video, and Diane is here in the studio with us. And today is April 2nd, and maybe we should begin by mentioning that it is the 30th anniversary of the beginning of the Malvinas War, where the Argentine military attacked the British occupying forces in the Malvinas Island, and that should probably make the point who the enemy still is today.
Absolutely. Okay, we have a very interesting situation all the time. Now, first of all, you should recognize that the situation is becoming much more severe than it has been before. We're the stage of going to a hot war, in effect, is what's in process now. And the very existence of the human species, as well as other things, are all at stake. And we have a very large responsibility for an effective presentation of the concepts which are needed out there, concepts which must be orchestrated to inspire people to respond. I think recently we've had some weaknesses in that kind of preparation. We should pay a little more close attention to the refinements of the way we put things on. It was this past weekend was rather sloppy. We had something going up from Sky, which was an interesting lecture from some tour, but the other stuff was rather sloppily prepared, and that showed. I had a little problem from something I inhaled or something, but I weathered that storm and went on to continue the effort. But the preparations for these things, that is in the quality of preparation and the thought about them, is very important, because I don't think we were too effective this weekend. Sky's thing was probably effective as a lecture in Boston, but I think our other things were not exactly the first-rate quality of production. So we're in a position now where our role on this planet is a small organization, but when it comes to ideas, ideas do not have numbers attached to them. An idea in one person may be the most important idea on earth. The ideas in the minds of a few people, as in the case of physical science, for example, may be the most important thing for all humanity. So we're not talking about getting large crowds or trying to stir them up. What we're trying to do is inspire people who can be inspired and who will become sparks which inspire people to accomplish things. Now, in this series of presentations that we've done with these meetings, so far I think we've done very well. There are obvious gains in the quality of the work of the organization through these meetings, which cannot be denied. But there's still a tendency to overrate large numbers of people, because large ideas do not belong to large numbers of people. Ideas, real ideas, belong to one person at a time, and the interactions between one person and another. And it's those things that are most important in all kinds of work the type we do. If you can develop one human mind this week, which is a rescue one human mind to become something of a potential for leadership in society, you may have done a great work, or something that turned out to be a great work. So don't look for the idea of trying to impress with cheap tricks, to impress large audiences and hope that you get a mass swarm of support. What you do is often you fight one person at a time, save one soul at a time, but just make sure you save at least one. And that, I think, is the standard which we have to stick to. And just have more confidence, more sense of responsibility, more respect for the actual way in which we contribute something essential to all humanity in the work we do among our admittedly modest numbers.
Well, what you're saying is very clear, and unfortunately it's not clear to the American public. We have the advantage in our association of knowing what's going on internationally, and these events, the Japanese threatening to shoot down this Korean satellite launch, and with the Chinese press saying they're going to have to rethink their entire nuclear weapons doctrine, that maybe they have to change their idea of no first use. I mean, anyone who knows this would be rightly alarmed that what you said way back when Gaddafi was murdered, that we were on a trajectory to nuclear war, it's all right there. But this is being kept from the American public, although you also find when you address it with people very directly, they do have a gut sense that something is very wrong. And I certainly have not had the experience that when you go through what's occurring where people said, oh no, that couldn't, people say that makes sense. And even on the question of the British Empire, the media freaks out, Wall Street freaks out, but the population knows. They do find it plausible that the British Empire runs Obama, that he is a puppet.
I think there's a little bit of internal laundry that has to be brought into play at this point. Because the problem that we've had, even with some of the leadership in our own organization, is they have not taken a serious view in the sense that what they've been attracted to are things they think will make a superficial impression for the moment. They are not thinking in terms of profound conceptions which have legs. So you have people running around as if without legs in our leadership. They roll around some way by some kind of ambulations, but they don't have actually working legs to guide them in the direction they go in. And we find some difficulty in getting people to walk in the same direction, even because probably they don't have legs anymore, or they've lost how it means to use them. And that's the problem is that what you're really looking for, you're looking to convert a soul to sanity. Mm-hmm. You're trying to change the world outlook of one individual at a time and hoping that you can repeat that on the scale of several or more individuals at a time. But you start from really change the world outlook of one person at a time. Do not try to play up to what you think will please them, which is relatively superficial. You must move as much as possible to make a profound change in the commitment of each individual. Now, you won't succeed in many individuals, but if you succeed in one or two, you're on the right track. Because there's a difference between trying to woo people into adoring you, which is some people's aspiration, and actually converting people from being less than they should be to what they should be. Our job is to move the mind of people, to get them to change their view of themselves and society from what they are more comfortable with because it's more familiar. There's nothing more dangerous in politics than the idea of becoming a familiar object of adulation. Because if too many people at one time believe something, it probably is wrong. And therefore, converting one or two people at a time to an insight into what history is and what it must be is the most important thing. If you can do it with 2 people at a time, you may be able to do it at 5 people at a time and be able to reach out to more. And that's the way we have to function. That's the way this organization has always functioned, when it did function.
Yeah, I think if you look at actually what does draw the big crowds, you know, you look at the fanatic sports games, the crazy religious ceremonies, or the Obama rallies of 2008. If that's what we're going for, then this is the kind of people we're going to draw, people that don't have their heads on straight. And I think also there's a way in which to get under the skin of people, to not do it simply in a kind of a reactionary mode, but I think to do what you're saying, which is to actually get somebody to make a qualitative shift versus a kind of a momentary reaction.
We have a list of things. You could easily make out a list of these objects which are crucial internationally. What are the make or break ideas that are out there to pick or to recognize? And that's what counts. Because people are, what are they doing? They're sitting, wondering what they're going to do, or not wondering at all. They're just going with the flow of life around them. They hope that they will get adulation or something less than that from people around them. They're not realizing that their society as a whole is now governed by influences which lead to the destruction of mankind. And therefore, what they fail to do is their criminality, because they fail to make the changes in opinion in people around them, which will cause people to change their opinion in such a way that they're on the real case, they're on the real issue. And what is not being done by the American population, by leadership, what is not being done often by us, partakes of criminality because these are the kinds of things to which you must turn your attention preferably at all times. You must change the direction of history from what it is if you don't change it. And that's where we are at. If you try to be popular, if you try to say the thing you think will get adulation, you have to ask, will you, what you're doing, change the mind of the person you're addressing so that they become not an also-ran, or less than an also-ran, but become a positive factor in shaping history rather than just somebody floating along the tide down the cesspool avenue.
Well, this is the difference between living in the future and living in the present. Because if you're chasing after the tail of the present at all times and always chasing popularity according to the present parameters, I mean, the case of asteroid defense is a perfect case. Because what if tomorrow it were to be discovered that there was an asteroid that was heading directly towards Earth? We hadn't seen it yet, and the question stood whether we would be able to get out to Mars orbit in time and divert that asteroid. All the popular issues of today would be in the garbage can.
Take another addition to that. Let's take, what's the practical issue of these objects? Practically, when we look at this problem, we are thinking optimally about the area of Mars orbit. Right? Because Mars is accessible to us, and the degree is that if we can put things out in Mars orbit, we can have then equipment which can effect a deflection of the trajectory of a large object headed toward an Earth intersection. Right. We can then hit it at very slight movement over that distance. You can, in advance, ensure that that object is going to pass Earth safely. Right. That's what it amounts to. Now, this goes from all the way out, further out. We also find that there are major objects coming at Earth which are not visible to us by present means. Some of these objects are powerful enough, potent enough, to take Earth out. We presently have no adequacy for detecting these things and no means for deterring them.
Types of radiations.
That's right. Therefore, we, as mankind, must think in terms of long-term principles always. These long-term principles may affect short-term, short-interval matters. But our general responsibility is to keep our minds, our scientific minds and means, way ahead of the dangers that might affect mankind. Right. And therefore, our commitment to that kind of scientific approach and thinking, those kinds of concerns, which President Obama and all the fools that believe in him have rejected. And therefore, our view has to be that of the future of mankind. Not just my generation or 2 generations from now or more. We have to think of the long-term future of mankind, and we can look at the history of mankind in the past, and we can see how long-term processes have actually predetermined the course of human destiny, including major wars, all kinds of things, and natural disasters come up. And therefore, our responsibility is not to respond to popular opinion, but to pre-shape it. Yeah. To pre-shape popular opinion from what it is, which we know is generally foolish today, nothing but foolish. The people you meet on the street are mostly stupid and foolish when it comes to the standard of saving humanity. They don't react to the future of mankind. They react to something that annoys them. or something they dislike, or a bad smell in the neighborhood. They don't react to the effect of what we're doing or not doing for the future of mankind. What diseases are we not working to discover how to deal with? All these kinds of things. Therefore, mankind has to have a shift of input. We state it this way. Most people think in very short term. They have no real idea of what's going on. They have impressions. They have popular opinion about certain things might be problematic, and they share popular opinion on some of these things. They react to these things. Look at all the forecasting done by our so-called forecasters. Not one of them ever undertakes, in general, there may be an exception here or there, but none of them, in general, ever looks to the future. All forecasting made by economic forecasters is bunk. There's never been an economic forecaster that I know of, apart from myself, who has actually made a competent forecast that goes into any depth of the future, even a relatively few, decade or two. Because they're always projecting statistically from evidence from the past. They adduce a pattern of evidence from the past and assume that the past has predetermined the future. It is not. And the requirement of mankind is creativity. Only through creativity, not through statistical methods, can you discover what the future is. The reason we've been successful as an organization in forecasting, and we've done better forecasting as an organization than any other organization on this planet, and that can be said safely, because practically everyone who forecasts is intrinsically incompetent, because they're trying to take a statistical trend, which they adduce from up to now, maybe a little stretching it a bit more, and assuming that that's the future for 10 years from now or 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. And it's never that, because things are in process that they have ignored or they don't know, and therefore they're running policies. For example, go back in history. Let's look at the time from the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And let's look at the cover-up of the assassination of John F. Kennedy to get the truth of the matter. If you're talking about the assassination of Kennedy, you're not really getting at the point. You're talking about the suppression of the truth about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Now you've got an insight into the future. Now look at what the future looks like. Since the assassination of Kennedy and the cover-up of who actually did the assassination, what has happened to the United States? What has happened to Europe? The economy of the United States and Europe has been in a continuous accelerating rate of decline, of physical decline, ever since the aftermath of the assassination of Kennedy. Mm-hmm. Because what happened was that there was a change in the policy making of the United States and other nations as a result of the elimination of Kennedy as a factor. Mm-hmm. And therefore, as a result of that, mankind is now, the United States in particular, has gone to hell. It's gone to the rubbish bin. All as a result because people did not, did not understand the future, how the future is made. Because it's only when we understand, as if from a good scientific standpoint, when we try to project things in space and so forth, do we understand what forecasting is. The typical economist has no conception, no competent conception whatsoever in forecasting. And that's why we're in this mess. Do you think if people had seen a picture of what has happened to the United States beginning the day of the death of John F. Kennedy and seen how step by step by step by step this nation has collapsed, what has happened to Europe step by step by step in a similar way? Do you think if people had seen that as the reality of forecasting, do you think they would have made the same policy decisions that have been made now? No. The problem is, our big problem is mankind, and particularly the mankind of the United States, most of the people of the United States, are not competent, not morally or otherwise competent to shape their own future because they refuse to consider the things that they should be able to consider which would help them know what their future is. I've been working at this for a long time. You can know what the future is. You can know it from science. You can know it from other means.
Lynn, I think this comes right to the point that you've made on the issue of national banking, right? Like on all these different projects, NWAPA, the strategic defense of the earth type policies, that what you're looking at with the credit system in this really, because, as we've discussed here in these meetings, that the platform that we've adopted of Glass-Steagall and the credit system, and really Glass-Steagall as sort of the functional side of just freeing us from all this Wall Street gambling chits. But really the credit system is that core constitutional principle of seeing where you need to be in the future and organizing the current resources and direction of society to meet that goal. That's essentially what a credit system is, and that's what, frankly, it even comes up even around the issue of fundraising. That's what we're doing, is we're shaping the outlook of society to meet some future goal. And that I think that any of these projects have to be seen from that standpoint, because that's what always comes up, is where are you going to get the money, these kind of lesser issues, because they don't actually just see it from that standpoint, that this is the direction that society needs to go, and therefore that's what should inform, and that's really what the credit system is.
You give a good example of that from our own basement work. A few years ago, we launched a new program in science. We had completed what was a preliminary educational program, which was what the basement organization originally was. Right. And it had some good elements in it. Well, we sat down one summer, toward the middle of that summer, and we sat around it's in a room around a table. It's like the famous thing from one of Schubert's pieces, where he was sitting around the mill.
Oh, Schöne Millerin.
Yeah. And so, but we were sitting there, and we realized that we had gone through the previous program for what would have been the basement program, which had been largely a pedagogical program. And now we said, we've gone through all this pedagogical stuff, and we now have certain capabilities. Where are we going? So we sat there, and we had a looking at each other and talking about it. And then I looked around at Sky and said, well, what do you think, Sky? You going to do it? And in the same way, we got into a second program, which was NWAPA. And we undertook a commitment to bring about the installation of NWAPA, which is a known capability, but it was pretty much sitting there totally neglected. And with this commitment to NWAPA, whose effects you can now see, as to how far we've come, we have revived a program which had died, had been killed. We brought it back to life. We went to people who were old people at that time, who had been participants in this program and devising it, and in the technology that it involved. We reawakened and quickened the souls of some of these people. We're going to press, in a sense, with a very specific design and proposal for NWAPA. We are doing other things of a similar nature in the basement, offshoots of the same kind of thinking. That's the way the future is made. And that's what we understand from the basement experience. We are still flourishing and doing new things and making new discoveries, setting new things into order. We are a significant part in determining the policies of some entire nations on policy questions at this point. We have nothing of which to be ashamed for ourselves. We have much to be ashamed of for people who are not us. And it's that commitment which is important. It's our commitment to the future and to looking forward to see what the future is. And the urgency of the absolute emphasis on the defense of Earth is a mark of the difference between a human outlook on mankind and a negligence which is inhuman in nature. These are the kinds of things that stir me up. When things that are essential, somebody tries to compromise them, somebody comes along as a wise guy and says, okay, I'm a wise guy, this guy, he's talking to you to do this, don't do it, here's what you do. And that happens in our organization repeatedly.
Yeah.
And that's what we fight against.
It seems like that is what is is inspiring the individuals is to action, is not necessarily the political sense perceptual discussion that they're seeing on the news. It's not necessarily the fact that they can see jobs created through NWAPA, because in a sense they'd still be pessimistic that it can be created if you're discussing it from a pragmatic political standpoint. But it does seem like it is when you bring up the questions of the role of creativity in the universe, things like what has been discussed in the Uyghur reports about the difference between a human identity and an animal identity, the difference between where the species characteristic lies. Now, in animal species, it's a temporally bounded existence. In mankind, it's not. It's more coherent with the universe as a whole. Now, the question of matter, antimatter, representing a power for man to colonize galaxies. It does seem like that those are the quality of ideas which are actually giving people the sense that we could produce NWAPA, and giving them more of a sense of their power to act and why, and getting them in such a manner that they could act.
Well, the problem is we lose it in our own organization because we are swarmed around by pessimism in the population amidst which we bestir. And in order to do anything, you have to bestir the population to what it does not wish to do. You have to provoke them into realizing that they've got to get off their butt and start moving. Where they would say, well, I'm a conservative. I want to go by my traditions. And tradition is often a name of suicide, at least moral suicide. And that's where the problem lies. We have to have the courage to lead. We have to have the courage to be devoted to true creativity, not to so-called improvements, but to changes in the way the society is organized. Like those who are going into space with the space program. That was a revolution. Now somebody's killed it. And someone says, well, the space program is over. That's a suicide note. Because if we don't have a defense of Earth, we can't say we have any future in this solar system. Mm-hmm. And therefore, those who are content to accept the shutting down of that program, NWAPA, and NWAPA as well, we cannot accept the suppression of those kinds of programs. And we must raise hell with people who are stupid enough, lazy enough, or rotten enough not to care about those things. It's those of us who care about the future, who insist that the changes that are necessary be made. That's what our destiny is. That's what our obligation is. When the people are stupid, we have to be smart, because somebody has to be. And it's our duty.
Yeah, and I think what Dave brought up in terms of the importance of the national banking is not just that this is something that people can decide that they agree with in terms of opinion, but this is a principle of the nature of our republic and what our Constitution represents. And so when you look at how to crush this enemy operation of the attacks that have been run against the nation to get people to believe in monetarism, or to get people to believe in this gambling culture that we've adopted, then once you put forth the principle of the credit system and the national banking system, this totally crushes this whole view of thinking. Because right now, I think one of the problems that we're running into in the population is that they can't have a sense of acting and living in the future, because this whole dominant view of I gotta get rich quick, gotta make money right now, is the NWAPA gonna make me some money, or whatever it is that they think. This is something that has been the downfall of the United States for quite some time. Now you look at what's going on now. The British the British Empire knows that their system's coming down. We're at a point of bankruptcy of the entire global financial system. And so they're ready to take everything down with them. And what we're proposing right now is something that has been the key qualifier of what our organization represents, that no other organization has, which is a commitment to these very sound principles against the popular opinion that has dominated the thinking of society for generations and generations, as you said, since the assassination of President Kennedy. And so you're dealing with something right now where, as you're going out to, as you said, change the population one soul at a time, this is what they're being gripped with. The demoralization factor in the degeneracy that's being set into the younger generation right now, where they are being told, you have no future, there's nothing you can do about it, and so therefore you should just go out and destroy each other. We're giving them a sense that everything that you've been taught is a fraud from the standpoint of your understanding of who you are and what you represent as a human being and your position in humanity, in society. I think this is something that really gets to the core of why our organization has been the key enemy to this oligarchy who wants to destroy that type of thinking in the population.
I'll give you a good example of that. In our own organization's experience, we've had people who've passed through the organization, shall we say. A number of people have done that. And what is a characteristic of this passing through to go downward? People then, first of all, we have a commitment to the saving of this nation, the saving of civilization on a planetary basis. This takes many forms of our commitment. It's always progress for mankind. What happens when people decide, well, I don't know if I'm going to work with your organization anymore? What happens to them? They immediately retreat from the commitments which we know are necessary for mankind. They say, well, I'm going to do this. I'll do something good. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be more practical. I'm not going to do what you're doing. I'm going to go where I don't get the heat that you get. I'm going to go where I'm accepted, where I can become a little stupid jerk and enjoy life that way. And that's what happens. You see the loss of a sense of humanity. Humanity is a creative being. It's the only being that we know of which is intrinsically creative in its potential, its nature. What happens? People become conservative. Some would say pickled. But they go backward in life to more modest ambitions, where they could be more easily accepted, where the powers that be will not frown upon them and say bad things about them or make bad gestures against them. So you find that people that turn against us often are degenerating morally and otherwise. And the only way you can say, well, you're going to do that, huh? Well, you probably give to a series of generations of degenerates. If you keep doing that thing, you're just going to get... And we have done that, haven't we? We have all these conservatives who don't like progress, who don't like high technology, who hate nuclear power, who hate scientific progress. And what is happening to the people who share in those beliefs or who support those kinds of beliefs in practice? They're all en masse going to hell and trying to drag us down with them. Whereas what we represent, we are tied to the future of mankind, to the improvement of the future of mankind, which is mankind. If you're not for the future of mankind, you're not human. You're just ready to die. And that's not a very dignified thing to do. And that's what the problem is. It takes guts and commitment to save humanity. And there's some people who have guts, and there's some who don't. And that's our problem.
One of the delightful things I did this week, it was fun. I went and heard an astronaut speak at one of the local universities. And the reason why I say it was delightful is because of the effect that this astronaut had on the 500 or so students, mostly science students, who were gathered in this large auditorium. Because it was when an astronaut, and this guy was hilarious, but he was taking people through a video of his experience of just 10 days on the space station. And And it's almost like an ambassador from the future coming to talk to the present about what the meaning of their life actually is. And I was a little surprised, but the most common question that was coming up from the students was, when are we going to go back to the moon? When are we going to colonize the moon? When are we going to go to Mars? And I think that is the better effect, that's the type of effect we can have on people. And I think that's the type of thinking process of a credit system too. You bring people into the future and you make them better. And there's a certain layer of the population that is, almost, is really desiring that, as I saw in this particular venue. But it's that's the type of inspirational quality I think we need to find.
It is exactly that.
Well, I was thinking what you were saying about these people who degenerate, because then what happens is when you die, that's the end. Whereas the people who don't, then they live on. I mean, like Beethoven, Einstein, there's something really universal about their existence. And it's paradoxical. We were discussing, because a few years back I spent some time reading a lot on the Civil War. And I was very struck, number one, about how much people valued human life. Like in the 1890s, you would never say, oh, Granny has an infection, let's just poison her. So, people wouldn't do that. On the other hand, 600,000 people gave their lives in this war. And there are thousands and thousands of people whose names we don't know today who gave their life on principle. And a lot of people today would say, well, wasn't that a waste? What's the difference?
Because they don't know what the future is. They're not human anymore. They've lost the connection with humanity. In this case, it takes the form of two things in religion. First of all, the death of religions when they become meaningless, and secondly, when they become kooky. There's two problems, two manifestations of this. Whereas if when you don't even think about religion normally in my neck of the woods, because you're thinking about creativity, you're thinking about the future, you're thinking about the future of mankind, you're thinking about what you're doing and its effect on the future of mankind, you are essentially living in devotion to the future. And if you're living in devotion to the future and doing some good work to that end, you're pretty much immortal. And that's about the best deal you can get. And so you take it, because that's the best deal you can take. At my age, nearly 90 years of age, I can celebrate exactly that sort of thing, apart from all those poor slugs at the age of 60 who are rotting away. Who shouldn't be rotting away. They should be being inspired. They should realize what they can do and get out there and do it. However sick you are, there's something you can do. And don't sit in your bed and die. Get out there and do something.
Now that's the basis for recruitment, is actually drawing somebody into a real process. Like, for example, just bringing people in to fill out the picture on what we've got to do with NWAPA. Those are things that need to be done, but then you draw them into creating that future, and it becomes a real foundation for recruitment, and versus anything else, which is just throwing your support, or like these, the things we mentioned at the beginning, these big rock star events or big religious ceremonies. It's just to pass the time, to feel good about some immediate thing versus a real recruitment to the future.
Yeah. But our sense of acuteness, as I've emphasized today, is this emphasis on the understanding of the future. I think there's a lack or deficiency in understanding of what the meaning of future should be understood to be. That we are acting on the future. We're not acting for the future alone, we're acting on the future. It's like what true forecasting is. How can you forecast anything, a scientific discovery or anything, unless you're forecasting the future. You're bringing into being the existence of a principle which is previously unknown to you or perhaps unknown to mankind altogether. Take the case of Einstein. Einstein, very simply, over a century ago, Einstein developed the concept of matter-antimatter. All competent science today is based on a derivation of what is implicit in Einstein's concept of matter-antimatter reactions. So as long as the universe exists, Einstein will be somebody who was one of the first to announce the existence of the matter-antimatter principle, which is now going to determine the future of mankind for all times to come. That's immortality.
No, and that's fascinating because you're discovering something completely new about the fabric of the universe itself. I mean, when you say E equals mc squared, you're saying that this thing which was supposedly a independent element, energy, and this thing that was supposedly an independent element, matter, are merely interchangeable shadows of a third. And it really is the principle of metaphor. You're seeing something that you can't see.
Well, permit me to add something more to this.
Sure.
About the future. We as mankind are changing the future if we are truly mankind. Now, what we usually think of us as coming from the past, which in a sense is true, but it's not really the truth. If we're human, we are creating the future. Just the way Einstein, for example, with the discovery of matter-antimatter principle, in his way he understood it then, actually was telling mankind to make decisions which are now being made in terms of matter-antimatter processes insofar as we deal with them. Thermonuclear fusion, for example, is a precursor of that same thing. So we're now, those who have dealt with these concepts and introduced these as concepts of practice to mankind have thus in their lives, by these actions, have created the future. And they own the future in the sense that they created it. And people who are not creating the future have really missed the boat. If you're not creating the future, if you're satisfied with the present and say, let's be conservative, let's keep it here, let's stop here and enjoy what we've got here. Let's not think about the future. And think of how many Americans today do not think about the future. And they sit in misery because when they were younger, about the time Jack Kennedy was married, about that time they decided to go along to get along. Don't bother with the future. You got it now. Enjoy it while you got it. Don't worry about these other things. And now the years have passed since the 1960, 64, 65 period. Those years have passed. And some people are still alive who were adults at the time that this happened. And what do they think of the way they spent their future from that time to now, if they're still alive now? What do they think of the things they didn't do that they should have done, which makes them bitter at themselves? And our job is to recognize that lesson and not repeat that kind of mistake for ourselves.
One thing, if I may add, that I think one of the things that we've gotten a sense of, I can say personally, is, when you're taking that question up of what the immortality of human beings and one's commitment, immortal commitment to mankind, it is a personal decision. And the leadership that has actually been effective throughout the course of history, whether it be President Kennedy, President Lincoln, whether it be Martin Luther King, or any others who have put their lives on the line, they made a personal commitment to mankind despite the fact of what it may result in terms of the outcome for their lives. Dr. King had a sense of what was going to happen to him when he gave his mountaintop speech. but at the same time, he was relentless in knowing that his immortal commitment to mankind was not just something that was of the moment, but it was something that he understood what he was putting at stake for his life. And it's kind of interesting because you think about it, you know, we're out there and people ask me all the time, aren't you afraid of saying what you're saying? You know, they ask, well, are you going out there because you really know what you're saying? Or are you saying it because LaRouche said it or something like that? And I said, you can't go out and say these types of things because LaRouche said it. You can't go after Obama because you're repeating a line. You have to have a certain immortal commitment yourself. And I think it's true. You know, people look at us, we are the National Slate. We have 6 of us here. But this question of guts and a commitment is a personal decision that people make, and the understanding of how you actually reflect that and you move the population is people seeing that in you, that you've made this decision and that you actually are committed to the direction that the nation should be moving in. And you see that amongst people getting excited about what we represent as a slate because they see that commitment from all of us.
Exactly. Precisely. There are other things could be said about the same thing are important, but I think enough suffice for the day, therefore.
Okay.
Okay. I agree. That's a good conclusion point. So thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thank you.
Have fun.